Hello? Baby?
It can be said with confidence, what we are witnessing and filming here at ground level, they are also recording that same data out in space. This UAP shows how anti-gravity works on extraterrestrial vehicles. By the early 90s, we already had a couple of these in our possession. We know this because of Bob Lazar openly discussing his previous employer and what he worked on in the Nevada desert. The behaviors of this UAP fit with what Bob Lazar said on the maneuverability of anti-gravity craft. At first, the craft remains static, blending in perfectly with the space debris, but then it suddenly vanishes, reappearing towards the right of the screen, traveling towards the direction in which it came from. Then the shot is fired. You'll notice a bright flash in the corner, followed by a visible round that was fired at the UAP. This phenomena breaks the laws of physics and flies out of view. You'll notice what appears to be a second shot that was fired. However, these shots are fired at the same time. Based on where the camera angle is and the curvature of the Earth, that second shot looks like it's much further in distance. In reality, what appears to be two shots is really just one. This type of weaponized technology functions in a unique way. When it comes to capturing alien vehicles, this approach of hitting the target is extraordinary. This weapon discharges, splits, and creates a net of solar energy that's similar to CMEs, that's strong enough to disrupt all technologies that get caught in its net. In comparison, the behaviors of this UAP that was filmed on the space shuttle mimic the behaviors of the video that we show in Chapter 1.
I'm not supposed to talk. How do I say it? I've always known I'm not supposed to be talking. And I saw them. I mean, you couldn't miss them.
If anything, they're more curious about us as we are about them.
They wanted to borrow the ending, or borrow the negative.
What is that? Because they were in a formation, and I remember seeing something, a flashing light. I couldn't tell the shape of whatever it was. People are reporting seeing lights in the sky.
Don't be talking about yourself all the time. Give the other person credit.
George Bush Sr. is president at this time.
Be a part of something. Be a part of the community. Give to others. I mean, that's the way to do it, and it comes naturally. And so I think for people just to sit and whine and complain about things in life, that's not good enough. You got to be in the game. Get off the bench. Get in the game.
He would have been the perfect candidate to give full disclosure on unidentified flying objects and their origins. Being that he was former director of the Central Intelligence Agency, he knew about special projects, programs that were available, and who to get in contact with. He was probably the only sitting president to gain access to the deep state, while being in the Oval Office. In January of 1976, President Ford offered George Bush Sr. the position of running the Central Intelligence Agency to fix the reputation of the CIA. It was damaged due to some of the secret missions in the past, like the Watergate scandal or even the Vietnam War. The CIA's involvement in Vietnam did major damage to their image. Protests all over the United States created tons of backlash during the Nixon presidency. Tensions spread as the American public voiced their opinions about the soldiers still being in Vietnam. The public also learned that our soldiers were exposed to Agent Orange, a chemical that was used during the war. It caused major environmental damage and long-lasting health problems to anyone that was exposed, including their offspring. George Bush was given the duty of repairing the agency's confidence and reputation. During his time of being the DCI, there were national security briefings that took place between George Bush Sr. and Jimmy Carter as a president-elect and a presidential candidate. On November 19, 1976, during one of these briefings, President Carter approached Bush Sr. and asked to be briefed on all information related to unidentified flying objects and their origins. President Carter was denied, and it's believed that the late George Bush Sr. took all his secrets about UFOs to the grave. But that's not entirely true. There's another version of this story that only President Carter would be able to confirm. This came from a woman who is no longer living. She was heavily connected in the political arena and in other areas of life. This is her invitation to personally meet the president in 1997. She was known as Sweetheart. Sweetheart stated that towards the end of 1976, George Bush Sr. provided information to President-elect Jimmy Carter in regards to otherworldly vehicles. This information that President Carter received from George Bush Sr. came in the form of a recording. She also stated that this recording was from 100 years prior, and it took place on the property of Thomas Edison. Sweetheart insisted that Thomas Edison's recording of Mary Had a Little Lamb was not his first recording. She went on to say that during one evening while Thomas Edison was perfecting his phonograph, he heard a loud crash on his property. He went out to investigate, and he discovered an oval-shaped object that completely toppled a shed on the back of his property. Once he was done investigating, he went back into the workshop and realized that his phonograph was still on and recorded the sounds of this crash. This is when he realized his invention was able to record and play back audio. How this recording got in the hands of the government, I do not know. What I do know is this recording was in the hands of the CIA in 1976. Going through George Bush Sr.'s history as the director of the CIA, you'll quickly learn that he was only employed there for 1 year. During this time, while Carter was campaigning for presidency, he promised, if elected, he would make a push for the government to release all information involving unidentified flying objects. Once Jimmy Carter became president, Bush placed a call and gave his resignation, in which Carter accepted. His resignation took place on January 10th, 1977, the day of Carter's inauguration. President Carter was happy with the changes that were made within the CIA under Bush Sr.'s leadership. He had to be replaced because of his Republican ties. Once Bush was no longer employed by the CIA, This is when he shared the information about the Edison recording with President Carter. Let it be known that President Jimmy Carter did follow through and make that push to have classified documents made accessible to the public. But then he soon realized that some of that information he was asking to be released could threaten our national security. Shortly after, a great idea was presented and put into motion right away.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
These two phonograph records were placed on Voyager 1 and 2 with the intention of letting extraterrestrials know our story here on Earth. They contain sounds, music, and pictures which display the diversity in life here on this world. They were specifically made for any intelligent life on distant planets. These phonographs would be considered time capsules, and President Carter added this message. This is a present from a small, distant world. A token of our sounds, our science, our images, our music, our thoughts and feelings. We are attempting to survive our time so we may live into yours. President Carter always had interest in extraterrestrials because he had his own UFO experience on an early evening in 1969, 2 years before he was governor of Georgia. Carter was preparing to give a speech at the Lions Club in Leary, Georgia, when one of the attending members got Carter's attention and pointed out a single bright white light off in the western sky. Carter gave his best description of the object that he and 20 other people witnessed. He said the object was a big bright light, as bright as the moon. It was just above the horizon, and then it began to come towards the group of individuals. It began to change colors, from red to blue, then eventually back to white. And then it went off into the distance and out of their view. He also said that the object was not solid in nature, and it was made of light. While Carter was campaigning for presidency during 1976, he was very open about what he witnessed that evening in Leary, Georgia. The contents that were gathered and placed on the golden records were personally selected by a committee that was headed by Carl Sagan. He was an American scientist and astronomer who was well known for research on possibilities of extraterrestrial life on other planets. Prior to the golden records, Sagan sent the Pioneer plaques into space, which were the original messages that were launched out a few years prior. The Voyager probes had a similar path as Pioneer 10 and 11, which studied the environments around Jupiter, Saturn, and the asteroid belt. The two golden records are actually gold-plated copper, aluminum electroplated, that has a pure sample of the isotope uranium-238. Uranium-238 has a half-life of 4.4 billion years. Sagan stated the records were sent into space with the hopes of extraterrestrial life finding them, and if they are intelligent enough, they will be able to play them and learn about human life on a distant world called Earth. Both phonographs were placed on Voyager 1 and 2 with a scheduled launch in August and September of 1977.
2, 1. We have ignition and we have liftoff.
Voyager 2 was launched on August 20th, 1977, 16 days before its sister craft. This probe took the path towards Jupiter and Saturn. And because the planets were in a perfect periodic alignment, it also went to the outer planets. First, the probe encountered Jupiter. Next, the Voyager would travel to the giant gas planet, Saturn. The next move was tricky, but successful. Using the gravitational pull of Saturn, the Voyager slingshotted over to Uranus. And then eventually made its way to Neptune. Before eventually heading towards interstellar space. Voyager 2 is the only probe in human history to have visited the giant ice planets. Voyager 1 launched on September 5th, 1977. During this trip, Voyager 1 would explore Jupiter and capture images we missed out on with its sister probe. It also went to Saturn, along with its largest moon, Titan. We decided to explore Titan because it was already known to have an atmosphere that could be sustainable. After exploring Saturn and Titan, Voyager headed towards interstellar space.
That I've just stated becoming generally known, so that people know that out there is a million other civilizations. They all look fabulously ugly, and they're all a lot smarter than us. That seems to me useful and a character-building experience for mankind.
30 hours. Also recorded will be a dispatch conversation with the National Weather Service personnel.
911? Yeah, is this the police?
We do the dispatching form services center.
Okay, I don't know if you guys do anything on UFOs at all.
Not a thunderstorm in sight. However, we tracked something else that night.
You guys busy? I can call that's not a real emergency. We just called about the UFOs. They're out there. Fake airplanes.
For nearly 200 miles of the Lake Michigan shoreline, from Muskegon south to the Indiana borderline, more than 300 people reported seeing 3 to 6 unidentified flying objects moving at very high speeds.
Central Dispatch?
Yeah, this is a non-emergency, so feel free to cut me off if something comes in. And I feel kind of silly calling, but my son insisted that I call. Why don't you tell him what you saw?
Okay, I was at a real high hill, right on the county line there, and it was like at a 45-degree angle to the ground. There was like probably 4 or 5 lights, and they were all flashing right in a row from the top all the way down to the bottom. And it was sitting there for a while, and then it leveled off, and then it moved southeast. It was up in the air quite a bit.
Okay, yeah, we got an officer down the area checking on it right now.
Okay.
But
Okay.
It took off real fast.
Okay, yeah, we'll let him know.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
911 police dispatch received an abundance of calls from people who were saying they were seeing strange lights that filled up the night sky. Reports came in that they were as bright as the moon. They changed colors from red to green to blue to white. And sometimes they were moving extremely fast and staying static. Some of the reports that were filed actually came from police officers. And one of them came from the meteorologist who worked at the National Weather Station. Hundreds of people that night witnessed this event.
911?
We were just wondering, have you heard anything about these lights that are flickering up here in the, what is it, the southeast area? It's like a group. It looks like a string of Christmas lights that's way up in the sky. And we wondered if you had heard anything about it.
Not a thing.
Wow, you might want to have somebody take a look. It's different. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know. It's strange. But it's right out east-southeast. It's way up. And it's just like a circle of a lot of different lights flickering. And it's different than any airplane.
Jack Bushong, who is now a retired meteorologist who observed the sighting on weather radar while he was working the Muskegon radar. He said they were just moving so fast, and he had very little time to describe what they were doing on the evening of March 8, 1994. He was working at the National Weather Service Station by himself. The phone rang, and it was the Ottawa County dispatcher who had been getting reports of seeing strange objects in the sky, and they were calling to see if anything was being shown on the radars at the National Weather Service Station.
Well, the service Muskegon. Hi, Muskegon. This is Ottawa County 911 calling. Yeah, how you doing? Good. You guys have access to a radar there, don't you? Yes, we do. You do. You getting anything weird down in the southern Ottawa County area? Anything weird? Hold on for a second, okay?
At first, Jack Bushong is just seeing the normal activity that would occur on a clear evening. At this time, the radar seems to be in an automatic state of operation, and he's just giving simple observations. As this is going on, the Ottawa County dispatcher is still receiving calls about sightings of strange lights in the sky. These calls were coming from multiple cities surrounding Lake Michigan. The public is still continuing to see the objects, and they are not sure what they could be. These objects are bouncing all over the place, from South Bend to Muskegon and even Chicago at very high speeds. There was recently a tower that was built in the area, and when it became operational, the tower lights were static. After a couple weeks, the operation of those lights began to blink. This came from one of the officers simply giving his own opinion on what he thought the people might actually be seeing. The dispatcher immediately tries to make sense of it all by asking some pretty good questions and remaining calm during the process. He's trying to help out without really seeing what's going on. He starts off by asking the callers if they are moving positions around on the property. Maybe that's the reason why the lights appear to be moving, says the dispatcher to a couple callers. But they are adamant about the lights moving in the sky.
Not really. Let's see, wait a minute, there's something right there. Okay, let's see what that is. Looks like there's a large return down there. Let's see, that looks like it's up about maybe, well, it disappeared, but it was up about 6,000 feet and about, could have been a plane, I don't know, but it was pretty big. Wait a minute. See what that was. Yeah, we're getting a bunch of weird ones down there, and like I say, now it's starting to, appears to be moving a little bit south. Yeah, okay, well, it moves. Let's see. Yeah, there's something big down there. Wait a minute, that's really strange.
Because Mr. Bushong was using the radar in the horizontal, he really wasn't able to see them because they were dropping and rising in altitude within seconds. The meteorologist then begins to notice a couple strange hits on the radar, but he still isn't too sure of what it is that he's actually seeing. At first, he thinks it could be a plane, but he notices the hit the radar picked up was much larger than your conventional aircraft. You got to keep in mind, he's not actually receiving the calls, so he's not really sure what he's looking for. He's just being told by a police dispatcher to check the radar for any anomalies in the sky. The reports that were coming in were about 3 to 4 lights flying in a bunch, sometimes separating and even changing colors in the process. They were being spotted in different locations within a 200-mile radius of Lake Michigan. He recognizes that the craft is moving indefinitely, mainly because now he's operating the radar with manual functions in the vertical. This gives him the ability to better track and observe while using the weather radar. The functions of a weather radar work like this. From an antenna, beams of energy are emitted. These are called radio waves. These beams of energy are scattered in every direction. The radio waves travel through the atmosphere and they strike objects in the sky, whether it's a plane, a storm, or anomalies. When those radio waves make contact with an object and then emits a signal back to the antenna.
It looks like a big blob. Yeah, that's the way it was explained to us. And it's not, I think it's almost off the scope. Let me go to another. Hey, this is weird. Let me go to another, let's see.
This call between the dispatcher and the meteorologist at the National Weather Service Station in Muskegon supported what people saw on the ground, including police officers. All of this took place in real time. As the dispatcher was on the phone with the meteorologist, the calls continued to come in, and they were being documented.
Yeah, it was up about 6,000 feet or so. And unless that was a... Okay. And I can't... It disappears. It's moving because... One pass is here, the next pass is gone. Yeah. Well, I got it on manual now. I'm just I'm continuously radiating on it, and looks like it's steady right now.
The reactions of this meteorologist are genuine. Excitement, confusion are all typical when it comes to experiencing something of the unknown. We now have somebody with exceptional technology who is observing these UAPs, confirming what police officers and citizens are witnessing. These craft are able to travel great distances within seconds, covering multiple cities surrounding southern Lake Michigan. They are able to use the energy in the airspace to get from point A to point B a lot quicker than what we know. The returns that were coming back to the radar showed these objects as massive points of energy. blobs of energy that are able to manipulate the airspace above Lake Michigan.
Objects.
Well, oh my God, what is that?
That were going together and coming apart.
Yeah, there's three, and they're lengthwise. Now I'm getting three of them, and I'm getting a third one now, and they're separated by about looks like about 5,000 feet in height, and about maybe
an officer just sent me a message here. He says
about maybe they're separated by about 50 kilometers.
See,
and they're very strong returns. I'm getting a real they're spiking, so there's something pretty solid. It's not precipitation or anything, especially up at that height.
Yeah, an officer in Holland City just sent me a message. He says, can we identify anything further? He says, looks like 3 to 4 of them.
I'm seeing three, and they're separated by they look like a triangle on my scope. I'm looking one around down by let's see. I'm seeing one down near South Haven. I'm seeing another one over Lake Michigan, about northwest of Benton Harbor, and another one over, west of, or east of Benton Harbor, which would be near, looks like Decatur. I'm seeing 3 of those. They're very strong. Now I'm getting another one down in Berrien County. These are huge returns. I've never seen anything like this. Not even when I'm doing storms. These aren't storms. They're just popping up all over the place.
This is strange, yeah, because the officer says it's green and red lights. It does not look like an airplane. Okay. They come together and then they separate, and they just keep doing this all the time.
And he's seeing that? Yeah, I'm seeing 3 returns. They've moved positions now. South Haven looks like shed more light.
Jack's reaction to the behaviors of these UAPs is uncanny. They are always multicolored, and they always appear to travel really fast. They are able to use the energy in the airspace to get from point A to point B a lot quicker than what we know.
The northwest by about, now they changed positions again. One about 20 miles west of South Haven. Another one just above, looks like the Coloma, and the other one is just off the coast of Benton Harbor. Wow, this is weird. Okay, now that one near South Haven has moved. It's moving further out into Lake Michigan. I'm getting them up. Okay, it popped. The one, now I'm getting 4. No? Yeah, I got 4 for a while. Now I'm getting another one way down. I did for a little while. These are all up around about between 7,000 and 12,000 feet.
Oh, this is strange. This is really weird.
Yeah, it's, I don't know if it's some kind of energy or it's the radar is picking up something.
It's your Union 22.
I wish we had a picture of this, but
I'm going to find out exactly where he sees them once.
Yeah.
UAPs like this typically remain unexplained. The erratic movements of these UAPs really began to pick up as they traveled south toward Chicago and the Indiana borderline. This also is the first time that officially documented reports show that the lights were in a V shape or in a triangular formation while they were traveling. They were sometimes separate, and then they would come back into a formation.
Southwest of Holland City. So that could be that one by Benton Harbor if it's up that high. This is really weird.
I was getting 4. Okay,
Okay, now they've moved position again. And I'm sweeping it back and forth in kind of like a triangle, just back and forth from where the beam is spotted towards Chicago, then I sweep it back toward maybe Fort Wayne. Mm-hmm. And each sweep, they'll be in the same position, and then all of a sudden they'll pop up somewhere else. So it's instantaneously moving, and I'm getting about between 3 and 4 returns. And they look like, sweeping in the vertical, they look like very strong spikes. I'm getting, it's really weird. So I don't know if I'm, these are bigger than planes. Usually a plane will pick up as a little pinpoint, but these are about, on my radar scope, these are about the size of maybe, looks like a half centimeter across. Righty, I'm gonna try Grand Rapids once here too and see if they've got anything that they're aware of once too. Okay, they look like they're all moving toward the south, towards Chicago. There's 3 returns moving towards Chicago. They're about over center of Lake Michigan, 3 of them in a triangle, and they're about the real southern part of Lake Michigan, probably just off the coast of Berrien County. Okay. Just northeast of Chicago. All right, I will give them a shot and see what I can locate from them. Okay. Thank you very much. You're welcome. All right, appreciate that. Yeah, no problem. Yep. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
The triangulation of eyewitness reports that included average citizens making calls to the local police department about what they were seeing was backed up by officers on the ground and eventually someone who had access to a weather radar. They all witnessed the same exact thing across different spectrums. The Ottawa County Police Dispatch fielded over 60 calls that evening. The names and reports were heavily documented, including eyewitness reports from police officers that were in the area. Mr. Bushon wanted to make sure that this wasn't a prank and what he was dealing with was real in nature. So he called back just to verify that he was really speaking to someone from the Ottawa County Police Dispatch. When strange things like this occur on radar, he needed to make a report about the sighting and provide it to his authorities. Thankfully, he had the call and recordings of the radar to back up his claims of what he was seeing. With the weather radar tracking these objects, Mr. Bushon gave the description of them being energy and not being able to make out an object or identify what it was. These anomalies would be classified as unexplained aerial phenomena. The behaviors of this UAP showed a manipulation between the gravity and airspace, causing them to show up at different places at great speeds. This is also the first time that officially documented reports show that lights were in a V shape or in a triangular formation. It's also important to state that during the time of this sighting, the northern lights were also on display. Could this aerial phenomena have been a part of the northern lights? Something went on that night over Lake Michigan. Jack Bushong's reports caused a major stir for his place of employment and himself. The National Weather Service station that he worked at eventually debunked the claims and said that they were nothing more than ground clutter that showed up on the radar that night. Eventually, Jack had to move from Michigan and took a job at the National Weather Service station in Atlanta, where he later retired. He did make his way back to Michigan in 2016, and he now investigates UFOs. He continues to interview people that witnessed the event on March 8, 1994. He came across one startling report where witnesses were camping at the base of Lake Michigan when they noticed the craft over the lake. They reported seeing the ship was pulling water from the lake. It was about 30 feet high and looked like a white waterfall. Mr. Bushon confirmed this did happen around the time he was observing the craft during the early hours of March 9th. Something happened that night over Lake Michigan. Where did they come from? And most importantly, where did they go? This case remains unexplained.
Okay, what do you have there, sir? There were at least 4 lights, and they were all flashing like okay, they were the sequence. It was a kind of like a V, and there was 4 lights, and they were blinking back and forth. And there's no way, I mean, a plane's not that wide.
In just 3 short years, the biggest and most reported sighting in U.S. and UFO history took place. It was a V-shaped object that traveled from Nevada to the Mexico border.
Well, let me say this for your documentary. When you talk to people, it's important for you to ask the question, what happened to the light?
You're about to hear from a former police sergeant and a police dispatcher who both were on duty and witnessed the events that took place on March 13th, 1997.
It's to the point now where you need to present cold hard facts to people, or else it's just not going to be listened to.
Before we get into that, let me say this. March of 97 was an interesting month, to say the least. On my birthday, the leader of Heaven's Gate took his life. Let me state this. We do not condone the actions of this group or individuals, and we want to be respectful of the families who lost loved ones. If you don't know about Heaven's Gate, or maybe you forgot, let me refresh your memory. Heaven's Gate was a group that many labeled as a cult, but technically they were classified as a religious group, led by 2 people, Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles. They both met in the 70s, and they hit it off from the start. They went by the nicknames T and Doe and created what was even considered a new religious movement based in America. This movement was founded by UFO activities and beliefs. They also believed that they were the 2 witnesses in the book of Revelations. In modern pop culture films like The Phoenix Forgotten or even The Phoenix Incident, the people that are depicted to have gone missing in the desert or picked up by a ship are in fact representations of the people who are part of Heaven's Gate. Some of the founding beliefs of this movement were that they would become extraterrestrial beings, ascend to the next level, and were going to board a ship that was trailing a comet. These beliefs were something that Bonnie and Marshall fully believed and preached to their followers. They both believed that they were here to fulfill biblical prophecies, and Applewhite believed he had a blood relation to Jesus himself. In 1976, they stopped recruiting and began to disappear from the eye of the public. Sadly, Bonnie Nettles passed away in 1985. Marshall Applewhite continued on with preaching to his followers that they would board an alien ship that was following a comet. Well, on July 23rd, 1995, a comet was discovered and later named Hale-Bopp after those who found it, Thomas Bopp and Alan Hale. And to top it off, an amateur astronomer by the name of Chuck Schrammett photographed a strange object trailing the Hale-Bopp comet. Also, a professor at Emory University announced that an alien craft was in fact trailing the comet. How would Bonnie and Marshall know that a comet would fly past Earth before it was discovered? And how would they know that some object would be trailing the comet? The closest flyby of Earth by the Hale-Bopp comet was in between March 22nd and April 7th. The Phoenix Light story, over the years, has become diluted with some misleading information. On the night of March 13th, 1997, a group of people did not go missing. There was not just one event, and the 13th was not the only night the lights were in the sky. As a witness to the Phoenix Lights, flares cannot travel in formation from Nevada to southern Arizona. That doesn't mean that flares weren't used later that evening over the Goldwater Range. The Goldwater Range in the past was called Luke Air Force Range. We have shown that this area is in some of the pages of Project Blue Book. The night of March 13th, multiple events took place over this range, including the use of flares. Here are two people that have not shared their stories until now. Both were in law enforcement at the time, and not only did they see a craft, they saw a craft at different times and at different locations that differ from the popular reports.
Would you put me out at 14910 Northeast 24th Street? Be making contact with the...
Well, my name is Elizabeth Compton. At the time this happened, I was working for the Youngstown Police Department, and it was a fairly busy shift, as I recall. You know, we had a lot of stuff going down, and they were up at the District 3 jail booking, and I had a couple of them that had stopped off, you know, for lunch, so everybody was inside. So I had a minute or two to breathe. Well, on this particular night, I was out there, and then I saw coming, like, from this direction and moving slow, I saw these 5 beautiful lights. And at first I was thinking, oh, that must be the Air Force, because Luke Air Force Base isn't too far away. And then I realized, no, those can't be fighter jets flying in formation, because for one thing, it was going too slow. And then I thought maybe it was helicopters. And then I realized it wasn't helicopters either, because helicopters, even when they're flying, you know, they can still do that little wobble, you know, like they do in the air. These weren't doing that. They were too perfect. And then I realized there was no noise. Even the crickets stopped chirping. There were no dogs barking. Everything was just dead silent. I was just absolutely mesmerized by that thing. I didn't know what it was. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it. And then the phone ringing in behind me kind of snapped me out of it. And so I pulled the door shut and I went and answered the phone. It was one of the officers looking for his report number. Then when I went back to the back door, it was gone.
When you went back to your normal shift, did you receive any calls, I'm assuming they would be like 911 reports or something, I don't know the correct term, but any calls of, you know, hey, I saw something in the sky, nothing like that?
Nothing. I received nothing like that.
And
so I figured if anything, they were probably calling the Air Force, you know, because some people, they would call the Air Force if they saw something up there. And in fact, that's what we would advise them. If they called and said, hey, I see something in the sky, I'd say, well, call the Air Force Base and report it to them. You know, we're street cops. We can't go up there and see what's going on. You need to call the guys with the Air Force. But I received no calls, which that was a little bit unusual too, because I was thinking, why aren't I getting any calls on that? And I was just honest with them. Yeah, I saw something in the sky. Well, what do you think it was? I said, I thought it was pretty. I did not feel threatened in any way. You know, I just was more, I don't know, mesmerized.
Can I get that case number?
You know, I just tell them that, you know, and then I would tell the people, look, if they had hostile intentions, if they really are from somewhere far away and they have the technology to get here, if they were hostile, do you think any of us would still be here? They could wipe us out. I said, if they had hostile intentions, you would not be here, I would not be here. And I said, nobody would be here. And I said, I said, if anything, I think they're just, if it's anything from anywhere else, they're here to take a look. I was facing the White Tank Mountains, yes, sir, and Luke Air Force Base was off in that direction, because Youngstown is like from Grand and 111th Avenue, and it goes down to Peoria Avenue, and it ends at the river bottom, the Agua Fria river bottom, and Luke Air Force Base is west of that. So that's why I thought, well, it's probably something from Luke Air Force Base, but again, the silence, that kind of blew my mind a little bit, because I was like, planes are not silent. This thing was just barely moving at a crawl. But then it also astounds me too, because when I last saw it, it was like right here over the white tanks. Then I went in, answered the phone, you know, hi, your report number is, okay, see you later, hang up, go right back, literally that long. And when I opened the door, this was gone. So if it had been just moving still at that same pace, it might have been to like there at that same pace, but it was gone when I went back to the door, so I don't know.
We'll have another conversation about this at another time.
Yeah.
But this is interesting to me. That is an area of interest that we'll definitely talk about.
And so we're both at 50. Follow the radio at 5800 Blackwell.
And 4 at 718.
Okay. Well, the reason I told Rico, you know, he had called me, and as he knows, I don't talk about it. You know, I've had people over the years asking about it,
I really don't say anything much about it. You know, I've had conversations with my kids about it and maybe some other close family members. But as far as public statements, I don't make. And the reason I don't make them is because I see myself as not only as a I don't want to say certified, I can't think of another word, observer, but a verifiable observer, you know? And then at the same time, what I was doing could be verified.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
you know what I'm saying?
You were a cop.
So in reality, that is a dangerous place to be if you have people who don't want something to be known. You get what I'm saying? So I've kept it to myself, not to discuss with anybody or any group of people. And I've had people come to me all the time, and I just, one thing I ask people all the time: what happened to the light? If they can't tell me, then the conversation is over. I know you didn't see nothing. I know there's no way you could have, like I said, there's no way you could saw those lights and then you turned and did something else. And something else had to take your attention away to where you couldn't do it. But if you were able to keep looking at the light, you wouldn't have turned your head.
Exactly.
But again, you could have been in a situation where the outside forces cause you not to be able to follow the lights, like you're traveling in the car or something happens, you just can't see them. So I told Rico that I'm going to talk to you only from the standpoint not to come out as a eyewitness to this, because there's thousands of them out there.
Yeah.
But more of to make sure that when you talk to somebody, you know whether or not they saw the lights or not, or they just part of the groupie. And for myself, unless I see footage that show what happened to the light, then it's not true footage, because if you had a camera on it, you definitely didn't turn the camera off. So if you show me a footage of just lights, it's not true. That's what I mean is that people ask me, I ask them what happened to the light. Well, what does your film show? And if you can't, your film doesn't show me, you can't tell me what happened to the light, then you can see it.
One thing I would like you to do is explain what it's like being a Phoenix police officer in 1997.
Well, then it was kind of awkward, being African American law enforcement. You have the law enforcement side of things that you are, that you live as your livelihood, and then you have the African American side of it, and that was during the time of NWA, that type of music about, police and versus black community, Rodney King, all that kind of stuff. So you're kind of stuck in the middle, trying to figure out, which way to look or how to look. But it was an interesting time. It was a really interesting time. I was a police sergeant at the time when all this occurred.
Your perspective on this, especially painting that picture of the 90s, or at least 97, that's huge, especially coming, from a sergeant. So March 13th, Thursday, early evening, what are you doing?
Well, early evening, I'm just starting my shift. I should start by 8:30 or 9 is when my shift started. I was working third shift at the time. At that time, I'm based out of Ahwatukee. There's a little substation there at 48th Street and Ray Road. So I'm basically monitoring Ahwatukee and south side of Phoenix, because there's no other sergeant or lieutenant around. At the time, they were busy on something else. So I had all Ahwatukee foothills and top mountain side from Central to Tempe up to Van Buren. I'm just out on patrol at the time.
Okay. So you have, it just keeps getting interesting because you have a perspective further south than what, all right.
Okay.
So I see everything from the other side of the mountain.
And it's pretty much open view over there. Paint the picture for me. Sun's going down. Is it completely dark? You're in your car.
It is absolutely dark. It had to be later than 9:30 to 10 when I saw it, because it was dark and there was not a lot of traffic. I took a gym down by 8 o'clock, so it didn't have to be that late, but it was late enough to where there was very little traffic out there, and very little traffic on baseline also. So the time, it seems to me the time is much later. I can't remember the time. It seems like much time must have been more like around 10:30, 11, between 10:30 and 12 was when I think about the activity that's going on. Well, what I see are the lights coming from the west, like far west. Lights shaped in like a uneven boomerang is how I saw it. Shaped like a boomerang, a triangle, moving a triangle, but like a boomerang with more lights on the left than we're on the right. So it's coming westbound. I'm coming eastbound from the west. So I can't really tell what it's over because, like I said, I'm in Altitude driving towards the north side, and I see it coming. I'm trying to figure out what it is. And then I stop and just kind of watched it slowly move across the city. So I can't tell if it's going over Central Phoenix or it's going over South Phoenix. It's just big.
I believe there were more than that one. What I do.
I know it had to be after 9:30 because I wasn't working yet.
So
it had to be between 9:30 and midnight.
When it's coming towards you, does it veer in any direction? Does it go over? What does it do?
Okay, the lights of what I saw are probably what the pilot saw. It would have been that time of night for what was going on. It wasn't early, wasn't a lot of people around, so it had to be late. That's why I keep hearing 8:30. I'm like, no, it couldn't have been 8:30. I wasn't even at work then. The light that I saw had to happen, really, I think it had to happen between 11 and 2 o'clock in the morning. And the reason I say that, because nobody was around. The police radio was quiet. I was listening I was waiting to hear dispatchers say people are seeing things, but nothing ever happened. Not a word came on the radio at the time. And I was so stunned by what happened, what I saw, that I went down to the precinct on Southern and 7th Street. I just went in and just stood there, walked around, see if anybody gonna say anything. Nobody said anything. Nothing came on the radio. No, nothing at all. And the first time I heard anybody mention anything about it was the next day. People were calling in the next morning about what they saw, and the governor at the time was giving excuses, I guess you could say, for what people might have saw. It was then that I knew that I'm not saying anything because there's no way people didn't see what I saw. And it's obvious they don't want to be known as what I saw to be what it was. So at that point that I decided I'm not going to say anything, because at that time I knew, me being a police sergeant on duty, and you can verify where I was at and what I was doing by radio and by computer, tracking the car and all that. You can see that wherever I say will be true. And if it's not something that should be known to everybody, somehow or another, I will be subject to whatever needs to be done to me keep my opinion to myself. Because I knew enough about being a police officer long to have been that there are things the public needs to know and things they don't need to know.
Exactly.
I understand that very clearly just in my job alone. Working the streets at night, when you go out there and you do your police work and you have homicide, you have death, you have all these things, the greatest thing you can do is get the streets cleaned up before everybody wake up, so they can have their normal day. They may hear about tragedy that happened on the news, but they didn't see it. So it doesn't become a conscious thing. They just get back on the road and just go on through their normal day or week like nothing happened. So for me, it was like, well, this is one of those situations where the public don't need to know until the government, whoever says what was going on, I'm going to keep it to myself. I share with my own kids from the standpoint of, I tell them, you must understand there's much more to this world than what they're willing to let you see. You must open your eyes, your ears, and your sixth sense to what's truly out there and available to you. Because what they're showing you is not true. Now, even Rico, I never told him what happened to the light. I tell nobody what happened to the light. The only reason I'm telling you is because you're doing a documentary. And I want you to ask that question, what happened to the light? And the only way, again, that you should accept their description of what happened is if their reasoning for not knowing what happened to the light makes sense. You know, they're not there now, and all of a sudden they're gone. No.
Were they near the mountain ranges anywhere?
They were closer to the South Mountain Range than they were up north. Because I thought they were flying over South Phoenix the way I'm looking at them, but it's so big. They were very wide, but they were close to the mountainside. They didn't cross over the mountain at all. If I was to guess, I would say I'm at 48th Street and they're at 51st Avenue. But they're so big, they look close. I mean, they're so widespread, the light. I can't see what the lights are attached to, but I can just see the light. That's why I say they had to be far away, because all I can see is light and not necessarily, you know how you can see a car headlight from a distance, all you see is the light?
Yeah.
But as it gets closer, you see the light in the car. But in this case, I couldn't see the body of the lights were on, I could just see the light. That's why I said it had to be still far away. So for myself, since that day, I don't look up in the sky anymore. I do not need any proof of anything anymore. I don't need verification because I saw what I saw, and you can't tell me what I didn't see. You know, and like I said before, because of my what I was doing at the time, that just makes me, what I say, more verifiable, because you can just check out records and see where I was at and what I was doing. And the mere fact that nothing came over police radio at all, and then we go to the precinct and nobody said anything. You know, I mean, the station was empty anyway. That's how I know it was late. There wasn't no officers around except for the clerk at the counter and maybe a couple of officers doing paperwork. But I kind of hung around the office for about an hour and a half just so if somebody would just say something came on police radio. Like I said, it didn't come out until the next morning. I saw it on the news.
So I'm looking at it right now. The reports that came in, that started to come in, they started at 7:55 in Henderson, Nevada. I'm not too familiar with the Henderson area, so, you know.
Henderson is like a suburb of Vegas almost. They're pretty much attached. You cross the street, you know, and you're in Vegas. And it's on the south end of town. It was just below the highway that connected the 15 to Henderson. That was south of McCarran Airport. But anyways, I was working what they call a crusher. And a crusher is a piece of equipment that crushes, you know, big rock, concrete and stuff into small rock. And they use it for road base and all that kind of stuff, for building highways and stuff. But we were working at night. And I'm used to seeing all the air traffic coming in from the east to land at McCarran Airport. That was common. I mean, there's planes lined up all the time. And then I'm used to seeing all the planes to the north that come straight from the north to the south and line up and land at Nellis Air Force Base. That's common every night kind of thing. And since I was on the south end of town, the piece of equipment that I was running is a loader, and I'm loading the plant with rocks, you know, to turn into a base. So every time I went to load the plant, I'm looking straight north. And my father and grandfather are both pilots, and I've been around aircraft since, you know, as far back as a baby. So I understand how aircraft work. You know, they're perpetual motion. They have to stay moving to stay in the air. I don't know how I remember noticing the lights, but, you know, I noticed a couple lights, and I went back to get more rock, you know, just scoop it up with a bucket, and I go back, and I just, you know, I just keep seeing these lights, and they just look unusual to me. It's like, well, that's not traffic coming into either one of the airports. That can't be a helicopters. You know, they're perfectly spaced, it seemed like. And it just didn't make any sense to me. So, you know, I just kept watching and kept watching and kept watching. And they were there for like, you know, I'd say probably 45 minutes, you know, or better, you know. And I stopped, and I yelled at the guy in the crusher. I says, "Hey, look at that." And he stood there for a few minutes and looked at it and just shrugged his shoulders like, you know, he didn't know what it was either. And as you know, if you're familiar with Vegas, Nellis Air Force Base is on the north end of town, on the very north end. And to the west of that, farther north, is Area 51. And all that area in between Area 51 and the highway is all pretty much Nellis Air Force Base training grounds. So it all looked like it was that far north of town. I remember going over someplace, I was at somebody's house, and then this thing came on the news about the lights over Phoenix, and when I saw the lights that they had taken pictures of, I'm like, holy crap, that is the exact same thing I saw north of Vegas. I mean, it literally looked the same. It had that same, it didn't look as curved as the ones I seen in the Vegas thing, but it looked exactly spaced out and looked just like those lights. And I know that they tried to say the ones in Phoenix were flares. Okay, I've seen flares. You know, I've done search and rescue. I've been around flares. Flares go up in the sky for a couple of minutes, and they sway back and forth as they come down, and they give a shimmering light. These stayed up there, you know, for like 45 minutes at least, and they didn't move, and it didn't make any sense to me. What I saw was exactly what was in those pictures from Phoenix. They were more toward Area 51, but they weren't that far away, I don't believe. I don't know how, you know, I couldn't tell how far away they were. You know, I just know that it was unusual. It looked like, if you're familiar with Vegas, on the north end of Vegas, there's a mountain range there.
Yep. And
it goes across. And Highway 15 goes up one side of it, and then the Highway 95 goes up the other side toward western Nevada. And that mountain range goes all across there, and that's all Nellis Air Force Base. And that's where it was. It wasn't, I believe all the lights that I saw were maybe 6 to 8 lights. I never saw more than that.
The next report comes from Paulden, Arizona, by another police officer at about 8:10.
Where was this at?
This was in Paulden, Arizona, and this is verified information. At 8:15, you have the Lay family at North Phoenix. I was at Sky Harbor. My bus was late. Normally I catch the second to the last bus. The bus I was on, the red line, was late. That was about 8:15, 8:30ish when we crossed over the bridge. And when I first saw the lights, that was, I would say, about 8:15, 8:30. Here's
you saw and what I'm talking about are not the same.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think all together that night, I boiled it down to about 9 different events, totaling till about 3 o'clock that morning.
That's why I said, but it had to be between 11 and 2 o'clock in the morning when the light showed up that I'm talking about, and probably that pilot was talking about. And like I said before, you know, I never told Rico about what happened to the light. He asked me all the time what happened to the light. I just won't tell him. You know, the only reason I'm telling you, that is truly something you want to keep to yourself as the car that you hide, because that's going to help you understand which light they might have saw and if they actually saw the light.
What I'm interested in knowing is because where you're at, your southeast part of the city, seeing them come straight from the west to the east, right?
Yeah.
Behind that mountain. So when they're coming towards you,
right?
What did they do? Where did they go?
Okay, now this is key for you when you're talking to folks. What happened to the light? Okay, and this is something you have to keep to yourself if you're going to be able to identify who's telling you the truth, or who's just talking. They think they're part of the bandwagon. Before the light crossed my path, that was at about 48th Street. Before they crossed my path, all of a sudden.
The story of the Phoenix Lights has become diluted with some false information over the years, sensationalized as just one event that only happened in one night. Learn what happened to the lights in the upcoming movie